You know, the older we get, the more we start noticing little things that didn't seem to matter before. Sometimes it's the way people look at us or avoid certain conversations. You might feel it too, but no one really says it out loud. That's why I'm here today. I want to gently share 6 common habits that can quietly push people away. But more importantly, I'll show you how small changes can bring them closer again. Let's start with something I see all the time. It happens so easily, and I promise, you're not alone if you've found yourself doing this. I'm talking about those little moments when health becomes the center of every conversation. And believe me, I understand why. When your body feels different every day, when there's always something aching or not working right, it's natural to want to talk about it. But here's the thing, sometimes when we share every ache and pain over and over, people around us start feeling helpless or even a little overwhelmed. It's not that they don't care. Actually, it's usually the opposite. They care so much that hearing us suffer again and again makes them feel like they're failing us somehow. And that's hard for them to carry. I remember working with a lovely woman named Margaret. She was 74, from Omaha, Nebraska. Margaret had arthritis and it was really affecting her hands. She told me that every time her daughter called, she'd start by saying how bad her joints were that day. She didn't mean to complain, but after a while she noticed her daughter started calling less often. One day she asked me with tears in her eyes, "Why don't they call me like they used to?" It broke my heart. We talked about it, and Margaret realized that she'd fallen into the habit of starting every conversation with pain. It wasn't on purpose. It just became a routine. So we tried something different. The next time her daughter called, Margaret started by sharing a funny memory from her childhood. You know what happened. The call lasted longer than it had in months. They laughed together. It was like the door to their relationship had opened again. What often helps is starting your conversations with something light or joyful. Share a memory, say a joke, or even ask how their day was before you talk about how you're feeling. It doesn't mean you have to hide your pain. It just helps balance the moment so they feel your warmth first, not your struggle. And remember this, you are more than your aches and pains. Your smile, your stories, your love, those are the gifts your family and friends treasure most. Let them feel that first, and you'll see how quickly they'll want to stay close. Moving on to something just as common, and I say this with kindness because I've caught myself doing it too. It's those little bits of advice we offer without thinking twice. Maybe you've said things like, "You should really," or "Back in my day, we always." It comes from a place of love, of wanting to protect the people we care about. But here's what I've learned over the years. When advice comes too often or without being asked, it can feel like pressure. It can make others feel judged, even if that's the last thing we want. It's especially tricky with family. Our children, our grandchildren, they have their own ways now, their own choices. And when we constantly tell them how they should do things, they might start pulling away just to avoid hearing what feels like criticism. I'll never forget a man I worked with named Harold. He was 69, living in Denver, Colorado. Harold loved his family more than anything, but every time his son visited with the grandkids, Harold would start giving advice on parenting. "You're letting them stay up too late," he'd say, or, "When I was your age, we never allowed that." Harold thought he was helping, but one day his son stopped bringing the kids around. Harold was crushed. We talked, and Harold told me he just wanted to share what worked for him when he was a young dad. I asked him if he'd ever tried just listening without offering advice. That next visit, Harold did just that. He sat back, smiled, and let his son share his own stories, and you know what? They laughed together. His son hugged him tighter than he had in years. One of the easiest ways to open up connection is by simply asking, "Would you like my advice?" or "Do you want to hear my thoughts?" Giving them the choice shows respect. It invites them to come closer instead of pulling away. And here's something to remember. Sometimes the greatest wisdom we can share is our quiet presence. Being there, listening with love, speaks louder than any advice ever could. You already have that gift in you. Just let it shine. Here's something else I want to gently bring to your attention. It's not easy to talk about, but I've seen how it can quietly push people away without us realizing it. I'm talking about letting go of personal care. Things like washing up, brushing your hair, or putting on fresh clothes. I get it. When you live alone or when you're not going out much, it starts to feel like it doesn't matter anymore. And with age, even simple routines can feel exhausting. Maybe your hands don't work the way they used to, or standing for too long makes you tired. So, little by little, you let those things slide. But here's the thing. People do notice. And sometimes, without saying a word, they start keeping their distance. It's not because they love you any less. It's just that being around someone who seems to have stopped caring for themselves can make others feel a little uncomfortable, even sad. Let me share a story about a man named Robert. He was 76 and lived in a small town in Ohio. After his wife passed away, Robert started spending most of his days alone. He stopped shaving, stopped changing his clothes regularly, and told himself it didn't really matter since no one was coming over anyway. But when his church friends invited him to a potluck dinner, Robert showed up looking a little too unkempt. People greeted him politely, but he could feel the difference. Fewer hugs, shorter conversations. He told me later that he felt invisible. We sat down together and talked about small steps he could take, not for anyone else, but for himself. Robert started with the simplest thing, washing his face every morning and putting on a clean shirt, even if he wasn't going anywhere. Over time, it became a habit again, and the next time he joined his friends, they welcomed him with open arms like they used to. One of the simplest ways to feel better and help others feel at ease is to create a small morning routine. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just wash your face, brush your hair, and put on fresh clothes. These little actions can lift your spirit and remind the world that you're still showing up for life. You deserve to feel good in your own skin. And, believe me, when you take care of yourself, you remind everyone around you that you still have so much light and life to share. Let me bring up something a little delicate but really important. I've noticed that as we get older, we sometimes lose track of how loud our voice gets or what kinds of things we say in public. It's not anyone's fault. It happens to a lot of us. Our hearing changes, and without realizing it, we start speaking louder. What's more, sometimes we don't notice when we bring up personal or private topics in places where others can hear. I'm talking about health issues, medications, money problems, even family gossip. When those things come up loudly in public, it can make people around us feel uncomfortable. You might not mean any harm, you're just being open, but for others, it feels like they're being pulled into something too personal or awkward to hear in a public space. I remember meeting Patricia, a 71-year-old from Phoenix, Arizona. Patricia loved chatting with friends on the bus or at the coffee shop. One day I sat near her while she was telling a neighbor about her bowel problems, right there, loud enough for the whole place to hear. I saw people shifting in their seats, looking down, trying to avoid eye contact. Afterward, Patricia told me she didn't even realize how loud she'd been. She thought she was just having a normal conversation. We talked about it, and I gently suggested she try to notice the space she's in and lower her voice when talking about personal matters. Next time I saw her, she smiled and said, "I practiced being the quiet one this week." She noticed that people seemed more relaxed around her, and her friends even started inviting her to sit closer again. One thing that really helps is simply being mindful of where you are and who might be listening. If you need to talk about something private, try to wait until you're in a quieter, more personal setting. And when you're in public, take a breath, lower your voice a little, and see how the space feels. You don't have to share every detail to stay connected. Sometimes the warmest moments come from just being present, offering your smile and making others feel comfortable in your company. Your presence is already enough. All right, here's another one that comes up more often than you might think. It usually starts with just a few words here and there. Phrases like, "Things were better back then," or "Kids today don't understand how hard we had it." You might say it without even thinking, maybe trying to share your experience, or show how different life is now. But let me tell you, after all these years of working with older adults and families, I've seen how this habit can slowly create a wall between generations. When younger people hear constant comparisons to the good old days, it can make them feel like their lives, their choices, or even their dreams aren't good enough. It's not that you mean to push them away, you're just trying to share your truth. But to them, it can sound like they'll never live up to your standards. I once worked with a wonderful man named Frank, 73 years old, living in a small town near Austin, Texas. Frank was proud of how he'd raised his kids, worked hard every day of his life, and built a home with his own two hands. But every time his grandkids visited, he couldn't help but bring up how different things used to be. "When I was your age, I didn't have a phone glued to my hand," he'd say, or, "Back then, we respected our elders." Over time, his grandkids started spending less time with him. Frank noticed but didn't understand why. When he asked me about it, I gently explained how these comments, though small, might feel like criticism to younger ears. We talked about trying something new, asking his grandkids about what they were excited about instead of pointing out the differences. The next weekend, Frank asked his grandson to show him a new game on his phone. They ended up laughing together for hours. Frank told me later it felt like he had opened a new door to their world. One of the easiest ways to build connection is by showing curiosity. Try asking questions like, "What's something you love about today's world?" Or, "What's your favorite part of being young right now?" Listening with real interest can bring you closer than any lesson from the past. And remember this, you don't have to defend the past to be part of the present. You carry stories no one else can tell, but you also have the power to celebrate what's happening now. Both are part of your legacy. Let's talk about something that touches my heart every single time I see it. It's the quiet struggle of not wanting to ask for help. I know how easy it is to fall into this. Maybe you've spent your whole life taking care of others, raising a family, solving problems on your own. Asking for help can feel like giving up control or admitting weakness. But let me tell you something I've learned after many years of sitting with folks just like you. It takes real courage to say, "I could use a hand." What's tricky is that when you try to do everything alone, the people who love you might not even realize you're struggling. They might think you're managing just fine, when deep down you feel scared or overwhelmed. And because you don't ask, they stay quiet, unsure how to step in. I remember a sweet woman named Linda, 70 years old, living in Sacramento, California. Linda had always been fiercely independent. She was proud of keeping her home spotless, cooking for herself, and managing her bills without help. But one winter, she slipped on the porch and twisted her ankle. She didn't tell anyone, not her daughter, not her neighbor, not even her church friends. She struggled through it alone, dragging her foot for weeks. When I finally visited, I noticed she was limping and asked what had happened. Tears welled up in her eyes as she admitted she hadn't wanted to bother anyone. We talked for a long time that day, and Linda realized that by keeping quiet, she had actually made herself feel even more isolated. The next Sunday, she asked her neighbor to drive her to church. That small step changed everything. Her friends were relieved to finally be able to support her, and Linda felt less alone than she had in months. One of the simplest ways to let others in is by saying something like, "Would you mind helping me with this?" Or, "I'd really appreciate your support." It doesn't have to be a big thing. Even small requests can open the door to deeper connection and care. And here's something I want you to hold close to your heart. You deserve kindness just as much as anyone else. Asking for help doesn't make you a burden. It makes you human. And the people who love you, they'll be grateful you let them show it. Thank you for sitting with me through these little truths. I hope you felt like we were just having a heart-to-heart, because that's all I wanted this to be. If something here touched you or made you think, I'd love for you to share it in the comments. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. Remember, no matter what season of life you're in, you are never alone. You still have so much to give, and life still has so much to offer you.